park ranger Victor Hayes opened the rusted gate of the abandoned Prospector mine on October 12, 2010, he expected to find nothing more than old equipment and bat guano. What he found instead was a human being. Amanda Foster, 29 years old, sat cross-legged in the darkness, her skin burned dark brown by the sun, her hair tangled, and reaching past her waist wearing what appeared to be strips of burlap sewn together with wire. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her eyes sunken deep into her skull, and when she opened her mouth to speak, her voice came out as barely a whisper. "The others didn't make it," she said. "Christopher is in the deep chamber. Jessica is with the stones." Amanda Foster had been missing for 4 years, one of 3 experienced hikers who vanished without a trace in Mojave Frontier National Preserve in March 2013. Her discovery alive, surviving in conditions that should have killed her within weeks, would lead investigators to one of the most disturbing cases in the history of American national parks. Amanda Foster grew up in Seattle, Washington, the youngest of 3 sisters in a family of outdoor enthusiasts. By the age of 29, she had summited Mount Rainier twice, completed the John Muir Trail, and spent months backpacking through South America and Southeast Asia. She worked as a freelance photographer, specializing in extreme landscapes, selling her work to outdoor magazines, and maintaining a photography blog with thousands of regular readers. Her images captured the raw beauty of deserts, mountains, and canyons, places where most people would never venture. Christopher Blake, 32, was Amanda's partner both in life and in adventure. They had met 5 years earlier at a rock-climbing gym in Seattle and bonded over their shared love of wilderness photography and desert landscapes. Christopher worked as a software engineer for a tech company, a job that allowed him to work remotely and fund their expeditions. He was methodical and prepared, the type of person who created detailed spreadsheets for every trip, accounting for water needs, caloric intake, and emergency protocols. Jessica Ramirez, 27, was Amanda's college roommate and closest friend. She worked as a high school biology teacher in Spokane, Washington, and used her summer breaks to join Amanda and Christopher on their adventures. Jessica was the most experienced desert hiker of the 3, having grown up in Albuquerque and spent her teenage years exploring the Sonoran Desert with her father, a retired park ranger. She had completed solo crossings of sections of the Mojave Desert and knew how to read the landscape for water sources and safe camping spots. In early March 2013, the 3 friends began planning what they called their Mojave Frontier Deep Dive, a 10-day expedition into one of the most remote and hostile environments in North America. Mojave Frontier holds the record for the highest temperature ever reliably recorded on Earth, 134 degrees Fahrenheit in 1913, and in summer, ground temperatures can exceed 200 degrees. But March offered more moderate conditions, with daytime temperatures in the 70s and 80s, making it the ideal time for serious backcountry exploration. Their plan was ambitious but not reckless. They would enter the park through the Soda Lake area, then hike north into the Providence Mountains, exploring a series of remote canyons and abandoned mining sites that few modern hikers had visited. The route would take them through areas with no established trails, requiring navigation by GPS and topographic maps. They obtained the necessary backcountry permits from Mojave Frontier National Preserve and filed a detailed itinerary with park officials, listing their planned campsites and expected return date of March 25, 2013. Christopher's mother, Patricia Blake of Tacoma, was listed as their emergency contact, along with Amanda's sister, Nicole Foster of Seattle. On March 14, 2013, at 5:30 in the morning, Amanda Foster's white 2011 Toyota Tacoma pickup truck passed through the entrance station at Mojave Frontier National Preserve. Ranger William Abbott, working the early shift, remembered the group because they arrived so early, and because all 3 hikers seemed extremely well prepared. They showed him their permits, their satellite phone device, and their water storage system, which included collapsible containers capable of holding 20 gallons. Abbott noted in his log that the group had professional-grade equipment and realistic expectations about the terrain. At 7:15 a.m., security cameras at the Kelso Depot Visitor Center captured the 3 hikers purchasing additional supplies, dried fruit, electrolyte packets, and extra batteries. The clerk, Rosa Delgado, later told investigators that she remembered Jessica asking detailed questions about the reliability of the satellite communication network in the remote northern areas of the park. At 9:30 a.m., the group's truck was photographed by another hiker at the Baker Springs Road trailhead, a remote access point on the western edge of the park. This would be the last confirmed sighting of their vehicle. According to their filed itinerary, the hikers planned to spend the first 2 days traveling north through Granite Wash, then establish a base camp near an abandoned mining site marked on their maps as the Silver Ridge. From there, they would make day hikes into surrounding canyons, photographing the landscape and exploring old mining tunnels. The itinerary indicated they would move camp every 3 days, gradually working their way north toward the Prospector Mine area before looping back south to their starting point. Their route avoided the most popular areas of the park, instead focusing on zones that appeared on maps as blank spaces between labeled features. On March 16th at 1:30 p.m., Amanda sent a text message via their Garmin InReach satellite phone to her sister Jennifer. The message read, "Day 3 going great. Granite Wash was incredible. Setting up base camp near Old Mill ruins. Signal is spotty, but we're checking in. Christopher got amazing shots of bighorn sheep. Love you." This was their last communication with the outside world. The satellite device transmitted one final automatic GPS ping at 6:45 p.m. on March 17th, showing the group's location approximately 2.3 miles northeast of the Silver Ridge site, in a narrow canyon with no official name on park maps. After that, the device went silent. When the hikers failed to check in on March 19th as indicated in their itinerary, Christopher's mother tried calling their satellite phone. The calls went directly to an automated message indicating the device was either turned off or out of range. She waited until March 21st, thinking perhaps they were delayed or had decided to extend their trip before contacting park authorities. When the group did not return to the Baker Springs Road trailhead by their stated return date of March 25th, Nicole Foster called the National Park Service emergency line at 8:00 a.m. A missing persons report was filed immediately. The initial search and rescue operation began on March 25, 2013 at 2:00 p.m. Ranger Supervisor Michael Rodriguez assembled a team of 6 rangers and 4 volunteers from the High Desert Search and Rescue. The search focused on the hikers' planned route, beginning at the Baker Springs Road trailhead and following the most likely path toward Granite Wash. Search teams found the remains of a campfire in Granite Wash that evening, along with several granola bar wrappers that appeared to be the same brand the hikers had purchased at Kelso Depot. However, no tent, backpacks, or other equipment were found at the site. On March 26th, a helicopter from the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office flew a grid pattern over the area where the hikers' last GPS ping had been recorded. The pilot, Captain Marcus Flynn, reported seeing no signs of human presence, no tents, no bright-colored gear, no signals. The terrain below was a maze of narrow canyons, rocky outcroppings, and alluvial fans that made visual searching extremely difficult. Ground teams reached the Silver Ridge site on March 27th, finding it exactly as described in historical records: a partially collapsed wooden structure, scattered mining equipment, and several old shafts marked with warning signs. There was no evidence that anyone had been there recently. The search area was expanded on March 28th to include a 5-mile radius around the last known GPS location. 2 additional helicopter teams joined the operation, along with a specialized search and rescue dog team from Reno. The dogs were given articles of clothing from the missing hikers' homes to establish scent trails. In a canyon approximately 1 mile east of the last GPS ping, search dogs alerted to something and led handlers to a small pile of stones that appeared to have been deliberately stacked. Nearby, investigators found a blue stuff sack, later identified by Nicole Foster as belonging to her sister Amanda. The bag was empty except for a small notebook with water-damaged pages. Amanda's handwriting was still legible on several pages, describing the beauty of the landscape and noting GPS coordinates for potential photography locations. The final entry, dated March 17th, read, "Found something strange near the old claims. Christopher wants to investigate tomorrow. Jessica thinks we should keep moving. We'll decide in the morning." This discovery shifted the search focus to the area east of the Silver Ridge, where old mining claims and abandoned shafts dotted the landscape. Over the next week, search teams explored every accessible mine entrance, cave, and rock shelter in a 3-mile radius. They found evidence of old mining operations, rusted equipment, timber supports, but no signs of the missing hikers. On April 5th, the search was briefly suspended due to a severe windstorm that made helicopter operations dangerous and reduced ground visibility to near zero. When operations resumed on April 7th, the team had grown to include FBI agents from the Reno field office, who were investigating the possibility of foul play. Special Agent Paul Henderson supervised the collection of evidence from the stuffed sack and notebook, as well as soil samples from the area where the items were found. The FBI's analysis revealed no signs of violence, no blood, no evidence of struggle. By April 15th, after 3 weeks of intensive searching covering over 50 square miles of terrain, the official search was scaled back to a monitoring status. Ranger Rodriguez held a press conference in which he stated that the National Park Service had exhausted all reasonable search options given the terrain and available resources. He emphasized that the search was not being called off entirely, but that without new leads or evidence, continuing the large-scale operation was not sustainable. The families of the missing hikers hired private investigator Trevor Grant, a former Navy search and rescue specialist who had worked on several high-profile missing persons cases in wilderness areas. Stone spent 2 weeks in May 2013 conducting his own investigation, interviewing park staff, reviewing satellite imagery, and exploring areas that official search teams had not been able to access due to dangerous terrain. His final report submitted to the families in June 2013 concluded that the hikers had likely encountered an unforeseen hazard, possibly a flash flood or cliff collapse that resulted in their deaths in a location not accessible to search teams. He noted that several old mining shafts in the area were too unstable or dangerous to fully explore, and that the hikers might have fallen into one of these shafts while investigating. The report recommended that the families proceed with legal declarations of death. In September 2013, after no contact or sightings for 6 months, the 3 hikers were legally declared deceased by the San Bernardino County Superior Court. The official cause of death was listed as accidental death due to environmental exposure and/or fall in a remote area. Judge Patricia Lawson, in her ruling, acknowledged the pain of the families in not having physical remains to bury, but stated that the evidence strongly suggested the hikers had perished in the desert. Amanda Foster's parents, David and Diana Foster, held a memorial service in Seattle on October 3, 2013. Over 200 people attended, including friends, family, and members of the outdoor photography community. Her sister Jennifer spoke about Amanda's passion for wild places and her belief that dying in nature, while tragic, would have been consistent with how she lived her life. Christopher Blake's family held a similar service in Tacoma, where his mother Linda displayed a large photo montage of Christopher's hiking adventures. She told reporters that she had accepted her son's death, but would never stop hoping for answers about what happened in those final days. Jessica Ramirez's father, retired park ranger Thomas Chen, requested that no memorial service be held. He told friends he could not accept his daughter's death without physical evidence and spent months reviewing the search reports, looking for missed clues or overlooked areas. In November 2013, insurance companies paid out death benefits totaling $750,000 to the families. Patricia Blake used a portion of her settlement to fund a scholarship at Christopher's alma mater for students studying environmental science. Nicole Foster established a non-profit organization called Last Light Foundation, dedicated to improving search and rescue capabilities in remote national parks. The organization raised money for new satellite communication equipment and trained volunteer search teams. Mojave Frontier National Preserve updated its backcountry permit requirements following the disappearance. New rules implemented in January 2007 required all overnight hikers to carry functioning satellite phones capable of two-way messaging and to check in with park dispatch every 48 hours. The park also installed additional emergency communication beacons at several remote locations, including near the Silver Ridge area. Between 2013 and 2010, there were 6 other significant search and rescue incidents in Mojave Frontier National Preserve. In July 2007, a solo hiker died from heat exhaustion near Soda Lake after running out of water. In November 2007, a family of 4 became lost in the Granite Mountains and was rescued after 3 days by helicopter. In March 2008, a group of college students required rescue after their vehicle broke down on a remote desert road. None of these incidents occurred in the same area where Amanda, Christopher, and Jessica had vanished. The case gradually faded from public attention. The families continued their private searches and investigations, but without new evidence or leads, the mystery seemed destined to remain unsolved. Park rangers occasionally received reports from hikers who claimed to have found equipment or signs of the missing group, but each lead was investigated and found to be unrelated. On October 12, 2010, Ranger Victor Hayes was conducting a routine safety inspection of abandoned mine sites in the northern Providence Mountains region of Mojave Frontier. The National Park Service had recently received funding to assess the stability of old mining infrastructure and to determine which sites needed to be sealed off to prevent accidents. Chen, 28 years old, had been working at Mojave Frontier for 3 years and was familiar with the area's history of mining operations from the late 1800s and early 1900s. At approximately 3:30 p.m., Chen reached the Prospector Mine, a small gold and silver prospect that had been abandoned in 1929. The site consisted of a main shaft entrance reinforced with deteriorating timber supports, several smaller prospect holes, and the remains of a wooden bunkhouse. According to historical records, the mine had never been particularly productive and was one of hundreds of similar failed ventures scattered across the Mojave Frontier region. As Chen approached the main entrance, which was partially blocked by fallen rock and debris, he noticed something unusual. The rusted metal gate that was supposed to seal the entrance had been bent outward, as if forced open from the inside. Fresh scratches on the metal suggested recent movement. Chen called out, following standard protocol in case transient individuals or illegal miners were using the site as shelter. When he received no response, he turned on his headlamp and carefully entered the shaft. The tunnel extended approximately 50 feet into the hillside before opening into a larger chamber. The air inside was cool and smelled of dust and something else, something organic and unpleasant. Chen's light beam swept across the chamber and stopped on a human figure. The person sat against the far wall, motionless, their body so thin that Chen's first thought was that he had found remains. Then the figure's eyes blinked. Chen later described the moment in his incident report as the most shocked I have ever been in my life. The person was clearly alive but appeared to have been surviving in conditions that Chen could not immediately comprehend. Chen identified himself as a park ranger and asked if the person needed help. The figure spoke, voice rough and barely audible. "Water, please. I haven't had water in 3 days." Chen provided water from his canteen, instructing the person to drink slowly. As his eyes adjusted and he examined the figure more carefully, he realized he was looking at a woman, though her appearance was so altered by sun damage, malnutrition, and dirt that determining age or identity was difficult. She wore what appeared to be a makeshift garment, constructed from old burlap sacks stitched together with thin wire. Her feet were bare and heavily calloused, her fingernails broken and blackened with dirt. Her hair was a mass of tangles extending past her waist, and her skin was burned dark brown, with patches of scarring and what looked like old burns. Once the woman had drunk about a cup of water, Chen asked her name. She stared at him for several seconds, as if trying to remember. Finally she said, Amanda Foster." Chen did not immediately recognize the name, but he knew from her physical state that this was an extreme emergency situation. He radioed Park Dispatch, reporting that he had found an individual in critical condition at the Prospector Mine and requesting immediate medical evacuation. Dispatch initially seemed confused by the report, as no missing persons had been reported in that area recently. Chen emphasized the severity of the situation and requested that a helicopter be dispatched immediately. While waiting for help to arrive, Chen attempted to gather basic information about Amanda's condition. She was conscious and able to speak, but her responses were slow and sometimes incoherent. When he asked how long she had been in the mine, she replied, 4 years, maybe longer. Time is hard. When he asked if anyone else was with her, Her face changed, becoming more distant. The others didn't make it. Christopher is in the deep chamber. Jessica is with the stones. Chen felt a chill run through him. He asked Amanda to clarify what she meant, but she simply repeated the phrases as if they were a rehearsed response. Chen decided not to press further until medical help arrived. The rescue helicopter from Edwards Air Force Base arrived at 5:15 p.m. Paramedic Monica Turner described Amanda's condition upon first contact: severely dehydrated, body temperature below normal at 95.8 degrees Fahrenheit, heart rate elevated at 115 beats per minute, blood pressure dangerously low at 85/50. Amanda's body weight was estimated at approximately 85 pounds, far below a healthy weight for an adult woman. During the helicopter transport to Valley Memorial Hospital in Barstow, Amanda drifted in and out of consciousness. At one point, she gripped Warren's arm and said, "He made us build it, the temple. He said we were the foundation." Warren noted this statement in her report, but focused on stabilizing Amanda's vital signs during the flight. Amanda Foster arrived at Valley Memorial Hospital at 6:45 p.m. on October 12, 2010. Dr. Andrew Cole, the emergency room physician on duty, immediately recognized that he was dealing with a case of extreme long-term malnutrition and dehydration. Amanda was placed in the intensive care unit and connected to intravenous fluids and monitoring equipment. Her vital signs slowly stabilized over the first hour, but her condition remained critical. Blood tests revealed severe vitamin deficiencies, particularly vitamins B12, D, and folate. Her electrolyte levels were dangerously imbalanced, consistent with chronic dehydration. Kidney function tests showed signs of damage but suggested the organs were still functioning. X-rays revealed healed fractures in 3 ribs on the left side, a fracture of the right ulna, and evidence of stress fractures in both feet. All of these injuries had healed without medical treatment, leaving the bones slightly misaligned. Dr. Richardson noted in his medical report, "Patient shows signs of prolonged physical hardship and inadequate nutrition. The healing patterns of the fractures suggest they occurred at different times over an extended period, possibly years. This is not consistent with a single traumatic event, but rather ongoing physical stress." A CT scan of Amanda's brain showed no structural abnormalities, but a psychiatric evaluation was ordered immediately. Dr. Sophia Bennett, a psychiatrist specializing in trauma, conducted an initial assessment on the morning of October 13th. Amanda was awake but appeared disoriented and had difficulty maintaining eye contact. When asked where she was, Amanda replied, "The hospital, the light place, not the dark." When asked about her family, she struggled to remember details. Dr. Martinez noted signs of severe post-traumatic stress disorder, dissociative symptoms, and possible depersonalization. Amanda's responses to questions were often tangential or repetitive, suggesting significant psychological trauma. During the examination, Amanda suddenly became agitated when Dr. Martinez turned on the overhead fluorescent lights. She covered her eyes and began to hyperventilate, repeating, too bright, he'll see me." The lights were dimmed, and Amanda gradually calmed down. This reaction suggested to Dr. Martinez that Amanda had been kept in darkness or low-light conditions for an extended period. Hospital staff noticed that Amanda's hands bore unusual scars in a pattern that appeared deliberate rather than accidental. Small circular marks, approximately half an inch in diameter, covered both palms and the backs of her hands. When questioned about these marks, Amanda became withdrawn and refused to speak for several hours. A forensic examination later determined that the scars were consistent with burns from a heated metal object, possibly a rod or poker. The pattern and distribution suggested that these injuries had been inflicted over time, not in a single incident. On October 13th, hospital administration contacted the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office to report the discovery of an individual who claimed to have been held against her will for multiple years. Detective Catherine Walsh, who specialized in missing persons and kidnapping cases, arrived at the hospital at 2:00 p.m. to begin a preliminary investigation. Detective Simmons first obtained Amanda's basic information and ran her name through the National Crime Information Center database. The search returned a missing persons report filed in March 2013, listing Amanda Foster as one of 3 hikers who had disappeared in Mojave Frontier National Preserve. Simmons immediately contacted the Mojave Frontier National Preserve Service and the FBI. To verify Amanda's identity, fingerprints and a DNA sample were collected. The fingerprints matched those on file from Amanda's background check for a previous employer. DNA comparison would take several days, but Simmons was confident that the woman in the hospital was indeed Amanda Foster. On October 14th, Detective Simmons contacted Nicole Foster, Amanda's sister, at her home in Seattle. The phone call, which Simmons recorded with permission, captured Jennifer's initial disbelief and then overwhelming emotion. Jennifer immediately booked a flight to Barstow, arriving at the hospital at 11:30 p.m. that same evening. The reunion between the sisters took place in Amanda's hospital room in the presence of Dr. Martinez and Detective Simmons. Jennifer later described the moment to reporters. "I walked in and I didn't recognize her. She looked like someone completely different. But then she smiled, just a little, and I saw my sister. I knew it was her." Amanda's response to seeing Jennifer was limited. She acknowledged her sister but seemed confused about how much time had passed. When Jennifer tried to hug her, Amanda flinched and pulled away. Dr. Martinez explained to Jennifer that Amanda was experiencing severe trauma responses and that physical contact might be difficult for her to tolerate. Over the next several hours, with Jennifer present and holding her hand, Amanda began to speak more freely about her ordeal. Her statements were fragmented and not always coherent, but they provided the first glimpses into what had happened during the 4 years she had been missing. Amanda repeatedly mentioned him and the temple, describing a man who had held her and the other hikers captive. She said they had been forced to work, to build, to prove their worth. When Detective Simmons asked what they were building, Amanda's response was chilling. "The temple," he said, "it was for purification. We were the foundation stones. We had to be shaped." Amanda also provided information about her companions. She confirmed that Christopher Blake and Jessica Ramirez had been with her after the disappearance. When asked about their current whereabouts, Amanda began to cry. "Christopher is in the deep chamber. He tried to leave. He tried to save us, but he couldn't. He's been there for a long time now in the dark." About Jessica, Amanda said, "Jessica held on longer than Christopher. She was strong, but he said she was impure. She questioned the purpose. He put her with the stones. I don't know if she's still breathing or if she became part of the temple." These statements suggested that both of Amanda's companions might be deceased, but the cryptic nature of her descriptions made it difficult to determine exactly what had happened to them. Detective Simmons asked Amanda if she could describe the location where she had been held. Amanda struggled to provide coherent directions, but mentioned the mine, chambers below, where the water comes through the rocks, and the place with the symbols on the walls. She also described being forced to walk long distances underground, suggesting an extensive cave or mine system. When asked about her captor, Amanda's demeanor changed dramatically. She became fearful, speaking in a whisper. "He calls himself the Keeper. He said he was chosen to preserve the old ways. He knows the desert. He knows where to hide. You won't find him. He's part of the stones now." This was the first specific information about the person responsible for the abduction. Detective Simmons asked for a physical description. Amanda described a man in his 50s or 60s, tall and thin with long gray hair and a beard. She said he had tattoos on his chest and arms, symbols that looked like old petroglyphs. He wore clothes made from animal hides and spoke in a mix of English and what sounded like an indigenous language Amanda didn't recognize. Further questioning revealed that Amanda believed there might have been other people involved, but she had only seen them from a distance or heard their voices in other parts of the mine system. She described hearing chanting and rhythmic drumming on certain nights. On October 15, 2010, a joint task force was established to investigate Amanda Foster's case. The team included FBI Special Agent Samuel Crawford, Detective Catherine Walsh from the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office, and National Park Service Special Agent Gregory Pierce. Their first priority was to locate and search the Prospector mine where Amanda had been found. as well as to determine if Christopher Blake and Jessica Ramirez might still be alive somewhere in the area. At 7 a.m. on October 16th, a team of 12 law enforcement officers, including specialized cave rescue personnel and forensic technicians, arrived at the Prospector mine. The site was immediately secured and marked as a crime scene. The main shaft, where Ranger Chen had found Amanda, was thoroughly documented and photographed before the team ventured deeper into the mine system. The initial chamber where Amanda had been found contained evidence of long-term human habitation. In one corner, investigators discovered a pile of burlap sacks similar to the garment Amanda had been wearing. Nearby were several plastic water bottles dating from different years between 2013 and 2010, suggesting that someone had been bringing supplies to the location periodically. A small depression in the dirt floor appeared to have been used as a sleeping area, lined with pieces of cardboard and fabric. Most disturbing were the walls of the chamber, which were covered with scratches and markings. Some appeared to be attempts at calendar keeping, groups of 4 vertical lines with a diagonal line crossing them. The classic method of counting days. By the investigators' count, there were over 400 such marks. Other markings included crude drawings of human figures, symbols that resembled primitive religious or mystical icons, and what appeared to be writing in a language or code that was not immediately recognizable. Following the main tunnel deeper into the hillside, the team discovered that the Prospector mine was far more extensive than historical records had indicated. Beyond the initial chamber, the tunnel split into 3 branches. The left branch led to a collapsed section blocked by fallen rock. The center branch descended at a steep angle for approximately 200 feet before opening into a larger cavern. The right branch appeared to have been recently excavated or cleared, as there were signs of fresh tool marks on the rock walls and piles of debris that had been moved aside. It was in the center branch's lower cavern that the team made their first major discovery. The cavern was roughly circular, about 30 feet in diameter, with a ceiling height of 15 feet at its highest point. In the center of the floor was a structure that investigators initially struggled to describe. It appeared to be some kind of altar or ceremonial platform, constructed from stacked flat stones. On top of the platform was a human skull, surrounded by smaller bones arranged in circular patterns. Forensic anthropologist Dr. Victoria Park, who was part of the search team, immediately recognized the skull as human and relatively recent, not an archaeological artifact. Surrounding the central platform were 4 stone columns, approximately 3 feet high, each topped with what appeared to be carved symbols. The symbols matched some of the markings that had been photographed in Amanda's chamber. On the walls of the cavern were more extensive drawings and writings, created with what later analysis would show to be a mixture of charcoal, ochre, and human blood. The images depicted human figures in various poses of submission and worship, geometric patterns that suggested architectural plans, and recurring symbols of the sun, moon, and stars. One section of wall contained what appeared to be a manifesto or religious text, written in English but using idiosyncratic spelling and grammar. Key phrases included, "The desert remembers the old gods, flesh becomes stone through suffering, 3 shall be the foundation, perfect in their purity," and "The keeper preserves what civilization destroys." In the northeast corner of the cavern, the team found a narrow passageway that required crawling to navigate. This passage led to what Amanda had called the deep chamber. The deep chamber was a natural cavity in the rock, approximately 8 feet by 10 feet, with no ventilation except the passageway through which the team had entered. The air was stale and difficult to breathe. In this chamber, investigators found human remains. The body was in an advanced state of decomposition, but enough tissue remained to determine that death had occurred within the past 2 years. The remains were lying in a fetal position against the far wall. Tattered clothing suggested the deceased had been wearing hiking gear at the time of death. A wallet found in the clothing identified the remains as those of Christopher Blake. His driver's license, credit cards, and a photo of him with Amanda were still intact. Preliminary examination by Dr. Kim suggested that Christopher had died from dehydration and starvation. There were no signs of violent trauma to the bones, but several ribs showed evidence of old fractures that had healed improperly. The condition of the remains and the sealed nature of the chamber suggested that Christopher had been placed or locked in this space and left to die. Near the body, investigators found scratches on the stone wall, similar to those in Amanda's chamber but more desperate in nature. Some scratches formed words: "Amanda, forgive me. No water. Please, God. I tried." The discovery of Christopher's remains confirmed the worst fears of his family and investigators. He had survived the initial abduction, but had died at some point during the captivity, possibly as punishment for an escape attempt, as Amanda had suggested. The search continued through the right branch of the mine system. This section showed the most evidence of recent human activity and modification. Tools were found abandoned in the tunnels: pickaxes, shovels, and improvised implements made from rebar and wood. Approximately 400 feet down the right branch, the team entered a large chamber that appeared to be the main focus of the captor's activities. This chamber, which investigators later designated as the Temple Chamber, was a shocking display of obsessive labor and twisted ideology. The walls had been partially carved and smoothed, creating a roughly rectangular space. Along the walls were niches containing various objects: animal bones, desert plants that had been dried and preserved crystals, and stones collected from the surrounding landscape, and disturbing human items, locks of hair clothing items, and more bones that appeared to be human. In the center of the chamber was the most elaborate construction, a stepped pyramid structure built from stacked stones, approximately 6 feet high. The pyramid had clearly been built by hand over a long period, as the stones were carefully fitted together without mortar. At the top of the pyramid was a flat platform, and on this platform was another human skull. Near the base of the pyramid, investigators found recent evidence of human activity: footprints in the dust, a wooden cup containing dried residue that later tested positive for human blood, and a leather-bound journal. The journal, written in the same hand as the wall writings, belonged to the individual Amanda had called the Keeper. The journal would prove to be a crucial piece of evidence in understanding the case. The journal found in the Temple Chamber contained approximately 200 handwritten pages dating from 2008 to 2010. The handwriting was meticulous and the entries were dated, providing a disturbing chronicle of the author's descent into isolated fanaticism and his eventual abduction of the 3 hikers. The author identified himself as Isaiah Crane, age 56, a former park ranger who had worked at Mojave Frontier National Preserve in the 1990s, before being dismissed in the early 1990s for behavioral issues. Thorne's early journal entries from 2008 and 2009 described his growing disillusionment with modern society and his belief that he had been called by the desert spirits to preserve ancient wisdom. He wrote about spending time in remote areas of the park, learning to survive with minimal supplies, and conducting his own research into the indigenous peoples who had inhabited Mojave Frontier thousands of years ago. By 2010, Thorne's writings became more grandiose and delusional. He described discovering the Prospector mine system and believing it to be a sacred space that had been used for ceremonies by ancient peoples. He began calling himself the Keeper, and wrote that he had been chosen to restore the temple and prepare the foundations for the return of the desert gods. Thorne's journal detailed his preparations for a long-term stay in the mine system. He stockpiled food, water, tools, and other supplies, hiding them in various chambers. He studied old mining maps and excavated new passages, creating a network of connected chambers. He wrote about conducting ceremonies on specific dates aligned with solar and lunar events. The journal entries from 2012 and early 2013 showed Thorne becoming increasingly obsessed with the idea that he needed foundation stones, human sacrifices or servants who would help complete his temple. He wrote, "The temple cannot stand on stone alone. It requires the willing sacrifice of 3 pure souls who will be transformed through suffering into eternal pillars." On March 17, 2013, Thorne wrote an entry describing his encounter with the 3 hikers. According to his account, he had been observing them for 2 days as they explored the area near the Silver Ridge. He wrote, "3 have come, as foretold. A woman who sees the desert through glass, photographer. A man who measures and calculates, engineer. and a woman who knows the old places, desert hiker. They are perfect. They are meant to be here. Thorne described following the hikers and waiting for an opportunity. On the evening of March 17th, when the hikers had set up camp in a remote canyon, Thorne approached them. His journal entry is chilling in its matter-of-fact tone. I revealed myself to them as the keeper. I explained the sacred purpose they would serve. The man tried to fight. I subdued him with the blessing rod. Investigators believe this refers to a metal pipe or similar weapon. The women understood more quickly. I led them to the temple. They resisted at first, but the desert teaches acceptance. Over the following months and years, Thorne's journal documented his systematic psychological and physical abuse of his captives. He described forcing them to work on expanding the mine tunnels and constructing the stone pyramid. He rationed their food and water, using deprivation as a means of control. He conducted regular ceremonies that involved cutting the captives' hands and collecting their blood for use in his rituals. An entry from June 2013 described Christopher's first escape attempt. The calculator betrayed the purpose. He tried to flee during the night of the new moon. I found him at dawn, collapsed near the surface entrance. He has been placed in the purification chamber to contemplate his error. The desert will teach him patience. Thorne's journal made clear that Christopher was locked in the deep chamber and left there, with Thorne occasionally providing minimal water but no food. Christopher's death was recorded in an entry from August 2013. The calculator has completed his transformation. His body remains, but his spirit has become part of the foundation. His bones will guard the east gate. Jessica's fate was documented in entries from 2007 and 2008. Thorne wrote about her resistance to his teachings and her attempts to communicate with Amanda against his rules. In May 2008, he wrote, "The desert daughter continues to question the purpose. She does not understand that doubt is corruption. She has been given the choice, true acceptance or joining the calculator in service through stillness." A final entry about Jessica from June 2008 stated, "The desert daughter chose stillness. She stands now among the foundation stones, her essence preserved in the sacred structure. Two remain to complete the work." The journal's final entries from 2009 and 2010 showed Thorne's mental state deteriorating further. He wrote about hearing voices, seeing visions of the old ones, and believing that the completion of the temple was near. In September 2010, just weeks before Amanda's rescue, Thorne wrote, "The work is nearly complete. The photographer has proven strong. She will be the final stone, the keystone that locks all in place. When the autumn equinox comes, the transformation will be achieved." The final dated entry was from October 10, 2010, 2 days before Amanda was found. It read, "Signs of disruption, machines in the sky," likely referring to helicopters or planes. "The modern world seeks to interfere. I must move to the deep sanctuary. The photographer will remain as guardian of the first temple. When the time is right, I will return to complete the work." This entry suggested that Thorne had abandoned the Prospector mine site shortly before Amanda's discovery, possibly moving to another location he had prepared. Following the discovery of Thorne's journal, investigators immediately launched an intensive manhunt. FBI Special Agent Park issued an arrest warrant for Isaiah Crane on charges of kidnapping, false imprisonment, and 2 counts of murder. Thorne's photograph, taken from an old park ranger ID, was circulated to law enforcement agencies throughout California, and New Mexico. The investigation into Thorne's background revealed a deeply troubled individual with a history of psychiatric issues. Park Service employment records showed that Thorne had been hired as a ranger in 1985 but was placed on leave in 1991 after colleagues reported bizarre behavior, including talking to himself about spirits in the rocks and conducting unauthorized ceremonies at archaeological sites. He was formally dismissed in 1992 after a psychiatric evaluation deemed him unfit for duty. After leaving the Park Service, Thorne had worked sporadically as a wilderness guide and survival instructor. Several former clients contacted investigators after seeing his photo on the news, describing him as knowledgeable but increasingly erratic. One client from 2005 recalled Thorne talking about temple sites hidden in the desert and claiming he had been chosen for a sacred mission. Financial records showed that Thorne had inherited a modest sum from a deceased relative in 2007, which he had used to purchase supplies and equipment. He had no fixed address after 2008 and appeared to have been living full-time in remote desert areas. On October 20, 2010, searchers made another grim discovery. While exploring the area around the Prospector mine, a team found a secondary mine entrance approximately half a mile to the north. This entrance led to a chamber containing human remains in an advanced state of decomposition. Forensic examination identified the remains as those of Jessica Ramirez. Jessica's body showed evidence of severe malnutrition and dehydration. Her remains were found seated against a wall, with her hands positioned on her lap. Around her were arranged stones in a circular pattern, the foundation stones that Thorne had written about in his journal. Near Jessica's body, investigators found a small leather pouch containing personal items. Her driver's license, a silver necklace with her initials, and a folded photograph of her with her father. The photograph showed signs of having been handled repeatedly, with worn edges and creases. Dr. Kim estimated that Jessica had died approximately 2 years earlier, consistent with Thorne's journal entries from 2008. Unlike Christopher, who appeared to have been locked in a sealed chamber, Jessica's remains suggested she may have been left in a more open space but was too weak or psychologically broken to attempt escape. The recovery of Jessica's remains brought closure to her family but raised new questions about how many other victims might be connected to Thorne. Investigators began reviewing old missing persons cases in the Mojave Frontier region, looking for possible connections. They found several unsolved disappearances from the 1990s and 2000s that occurred in areas where Thorne was known to have worked or visited. One case from 2001 involved a solo hiker who vanished near the Granite Mountains. Another from 2007 involved a photographer who was last seen in the Providence Mountains area. While no direct evidence linked these cases to Thorne, the similarities were troubling. Meanwhile, the search for Thorne himself continued. Investigators theorized that he had prepared additional hideouts in the desert based on references in his journal to the Deep Sanctuary and the Western Temple. Search teams combed through remote areas of Mojave Frontier, Anza Borrego Desert State Park, and surrounding wilderness areas. On November 3, 2010, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A geology professor from the University of California reported finding fresh footprints and evidence of recent human activity near an abandoned mine in the Granite Mountains, approximately 30 miles from the Prospector mine. A tactical team from the FBI, including crisis negotiators and medical personnel, was dispatched to the location on November 4th. The team approached cautiously, using thermal imaging to detect any human presence. At approximately 2 p.m., agents entered the mine and found Isaiah Crane in a small chamber, sitting cross-legged in front of a makeshift altar, similar to those found at the Prospector mine. Thorne offered no resistance when agents ordered him to surrender. According to the arrest report, he remained calm and seemed almost relieved to be discovered. His first words to the agents were, "The work is complete. I have done what was required. The temples will stand long after civilization falls." Thorne was taken into custody and transported to the San Bernardino County Jail. A medical examination found him to be in surprisingly good physical condition for his age, though severely dehydrated. He had multiple scars and burn marks on his body, which he later claimed were from purification rituals he had performed on himself. During his initial interrogation, Thorne showed no remorse for his actions. He spoke about the 3 hikers as willing participants in his sacred mission, claiming they had understood and accepted their roles. When confronted with evidence of the suffering he had inflicted, he responded that transformation requires sacrifice, and the desert teaches through hardship. Thorne's competency to stand trial became an immediate question. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Richard Palmer conducted a comprehensive evaluation over several weeks. His report, submitted in December 2010, concluded that while Thorne suffered from delusional disorder and possibly schizophrenia with religious themes, he understood the nature and consequences of his actions and could distinguish right from wrong. The evaluation found Thorne competent to stand trial. The trial of Isaiah Crane began on February 3, 2018, In the San Bernardino County Superior Court, Judge Harold Whitfield presided over the case, which attracted national media attention. Thorne was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of kidnapping, 3 counts of false imprisonment, and multiple counts of assault. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Julia Brennan, built their case on the physical evidence from the mine sites, Thorne's own journal entries, and the testimony of Amanda Foster. Amanda testified for 3 days, describing in painful detail the years she had spent in captivity. She wore sunglasses during her testimony due to her continued sensitivity to bright light. Her voice was quiet but steady as she recounted how Thorne had abducted her and her friends, how he had forced them to work on his delusional temple project, and how she had watched both Christopher and Jessica die. When asked why she hadn't attempted to escape, Amanda explained, "He controlled everything. The water, the food, when we could sleep, when we had to work. He convinced us that the desert outside would kill us faster than he would. And after months, then years, part of me started to believe him. Part of me forgot there was an outside world at all." Amanda's testimony about the psychological manipulation she endured was corroborated by expert witnesses, including Dr. Martinez, who explained trauma bonding and the effects of prolonged captivity. The defense attempted to argue that Thorne's mental illness negated his criminal responsibility, but the prosecution successfully demonstrated that his elaborate planning, his ability to evade detection for years, and his methodical documentation of his actions all indicated a functioning if disturbed mind. On March 15, 2018, after 4 days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. Judge Martinez sentenced Thorne to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During the sentencing, Thorne was given an opportunity to speak. He stood and addressed the court. "You call this justice, but you do not understand the higher purpose. The temples I built will outlast your laws. The desert remembers what you have forgotten. My work is finished." He said nothing else and showed no emotion as he was led from the courtroom. The families of the victims were present for the verdict and sentencing. Nicole Foster read a victim impact statement on behalf of her sister, describing the Amanda who left for a hiking trip in 2013 and the profoundly changed person who returned. "My sister survived, but the person she was is gone," Jennifer said. "She still has nightmares every night. She can't be in enclosed spaces. She flinches at sudden movements. The man who did this to her didn't just steal 4 years of her life. He stole her peace of mind, her sense of safety in the world, her ability to trust. That's a theft that can never be repaid." Christopher Blake's mother, Linda, spoke about her son's death in the deep chamber. "My son died alone in the dark, probably calling for help that never came. No mother should have to imagine that. I take some comfort knowing that his killer will spend the rest of his life in a cell, but it doesn't bring Christopher back." Jessica Ramirez's father, Thomas, was too overcome with emotion to read his own statement, so the prosecutor read it for him. It described Jessica's love for the desert and the cruel irony that the landscape she cherished had become her tomb. Following the trial, the FBI closed its active investigation of Thorne, but kept several cold cases open as potentially related. Agents continued to search other remote areas where Thorne's journal had mentioned sacred sites or temple foundations. While no additional victims were found, investigators discovered evidence at 2 other abandoned mines suggesting Thorne had used them as temporary camps or storage sites. Amanda Foster remained in psychiatric treatment throughout the trial and continued intensive therapy afterward. Dr. Sophia Bennett, who coordinated Amanda's care, described her progress as remarkable given the severity of her trauma, but the recovery will be lifelong. In April 2018, Amanda was officially diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, a condition that develops after prolonged, repeated trauma. Her treatment included specialized therapy for trauma survivors, medication for anxiety and depression, and gradual exposure therapy to help her readjust to normal life. Physical rehabilitation was also a major focus. Amanda's body had adapted to the extreme conditions of her captivity, developing protective responses that were no longer necessary. She required physical therapy to address muscle atrophy and to relearn normal movement patterns. Dental work was needed to repair damage from years of inadequate nutrition. Her eyesight had been affected by the prolonged time in darkness, requiring corrective lenses. By summer 2018, Amanda had made enough progress to move from inpatient care to outpatient treatment. She relocated to a small town in Northern California, choosing to live in a place where she could be near nature, but also close to her sister Jennifer. Amanda gave a single interview to a documentary filmmaker in June 2018, hoping that sharing her story might help other trauma survivors or families of missing persons. In the interview, she spoke about the psychological tactics Thorne had used to maintain control. He was very smart about it. He would give us just enough water to survive, just enough food to keep working, and he would talk constantly about the purpose, the sacred mission, how we were chosen. After a while, when you're that isolated and that desperate, you start to question reality. Maybe he was right. Maybe this was my purpose. That's how he broke us down. When asked about Christopher and Jessica, Amanda became quiet. I think about them every day. I wonder if I could have done something different to save them. The rational part of my mind knows I was a victim too, that I had no power to change what happened, but the guilt doesn't listen to rational explanations. Amanda also described the moment she decided to try to escape in late 2010. Thorne had been acting strange for weeks, more paranoid than usual. He kept talking about disruptions and needing to move to a new location. I realized he might take me somewhere even more remote, somewhere I would never be found. When he left the mine to scout the new location, he didn't seal the gate completely. It was the first mistake he'd made in 4 years. I was too weak to walk far, but I knew if I stayed in the main chamber, someone might eventually find me, so I waited. By the end of 2018, Amanda had begun to reclaim small pieces of her former life. She started taking photographs again, though she focused on indoor subjects and urban landscapes rather than wilderness scenes. She reconnected with old friends cautiously and began the process of rebuilding her identity as someone beyond the survivor. Her recovery was ongoing and incomplete, but she had survived in the most literal sense. The Mojave Frontier case led to significant changes in national park protocols and missing persons investigations. In June 2018, the National Park Service implemented new requirements for all backcountry permits in Mojave Frontier. All overnight hikers were now required to carry satellite phones with two-way messaging and to check in with park dispatch every 24 hours. Permits for solo hikers in remote areas were subject to additional scrutiny and required proof of extensive wilderness experience. The Park Service also increased ranger patrols in remote areas and conducted systematic surveys of abandoned mine sites to identify potential hiding places or hazards. Over 300 old mines in the Mojave Frontier region were catalogued, assessed for stability, and either sealed or marked with stronger warnings. The investigation raised troubling questions about how Thorne had operated undetected for so long. A review of the initial 2013 search operation found that while the search area had technically included the region where the Prospector mine was located, the mine itself had not been thoroughly searched. The assumption had been that the hikers would not have ventured into dangerous abandoned mines, an assumption that proved tragically incorrect. The case also highlighted gaps in the missing persons database system. Several other hikers who had disappeared in the Mojave Frontier region over the years had never been connected as potentially related cases because they were investigated separately by different agencies. A new protocol was established requiring better information sharing between local, state, and federal agencies when wilderness disappearances occurred. The families of Amanda, Christopher, and Jessica worked together to establish the Desert Survivors Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to improving wilderness safety and supporting families of missing persons. The foundation funded research into search and rescue technology, provided financial assistance to families conducting private searches, and advocated for policy changes in national parks. As of late 2018, several questions remained unanswered. Investigators never determined with certainty whether Thorne had other victims before 2013. While his journal suggested this was his first abduction of multiple people, references to earlier attempts and failed foundations left room for speculation. Searches of remote desert areas continued sporadically, but no additional remains were found. The Deep Sanctuary and Western Temple, that Thorne mentioned in his journal were never definitively located. It's possible these were delusions or references to planned sites that were never actually developed, or they might be real locations still hidden in the vast wilderness, waiting to be discovered. The question of how Thorne survived alone in the desert for years before the abductions also remained partially unanswered. Evidence suggested he had stockpiled supplies and developed extensive knowledge of desert survival, but the full extent of his preparations and capabilities was never completely understood. Some investigators theorized he might have had accomplices or supporters who helped him at various times, though no evidence of this was ever found. The story of Amanda Foster's survival in Mojave Frontier and the deaths of Christopher Blake and Jessica Ramirez became one of the most extensively documented missing persons cases in the history of American national parks. It illustrated the vulnerability of even experienced hikers in remote wilderness areas, and the horrifying reality that the greatest danger sometimes comes not from the environment, but from other humans. For Amanda, life after captivity meant learning to live with permanent changes. In her interview, she reflected on what the experience had taught her about human resilience and fragility. People ask me how I survived, and I don't have a good answer. Part of it was physical, just the body's ability to adapt to almost anything if you give it time. But part of it was mental, finding something inside yourself that refuses to completely disappear, no matter how much is taken from you. She also spoke about the desert itself and her complicated relationship with the landscape that had been both the site of her passion and her prison. I used to love the desert for its emptiness, the way it made me feel small and connected to something larger. Now I understand that emptiness differently. It's not just peaceful, it's also indifferent. The desert doesn't care about your story or your suffering. It just exists, and you're just another temporary thing passing through. The physical temples that Isaiah Crane built in the desert remain sealed inside the abandoned mines where they were discovered. The Park Service debated whether to dismantle them or leave them as they were found. Ultimately, the decision was made to seal the mine entrances permanently, turning the sites into unmarked graves for Thorne's delusions. The stone pyramid, the altar, the symbols on the walls, all of it remains underground, slowly being reclaimed by darkness and dust. Amanda Foster is alive, continuing her recovery, learning to navigate a world that sometimes feels as alien and hostile as the mine where she was held. Christopher Blake's remains were cremated and scattered in a forest in Northern California, far from the desert where he died. Jessica Ramirez was buried in Albuquerque, with hundreds of her former students attending the funeral to honor a teacher who had taught them to love the natural world. Isaiah Crane sits in a maximum security prison, where he reportedly spends his time writing about his sacred mission in letters that prison officials monitor but do not distribute. He maintains that he will be vindicated when the old gods return, and has shown no acknowledgement of the suffering he caused. The case remains a reminder that wilderness areas can conceal more than just wildlife and scenic views. They can hide people who reject society so completely that they create their own twisted realities, and sometimes they trap those unfortunate enough to cross their paths. For anyone who hikes in remote areas, the disappearance of Amanda Foster, Christopher Blake, and Jessica Ramirez serves as a cautionary tale about the limits of preparation and the unpredictable nature of human threat. No amount of equipment or experience can protect against every danger. Sometimes the wilderness is just wilderness, indifferent and empty, and sometimes it's occupied by something far worse. The desert keeps its secrets until it chooses to reveal them, and some secrets, once revealed, can never be forgotten.